Uh, what's up, everybody? Sorry, I'm using StreamYard. I don't usually use it, but I'm using it tonight because we got it. I got it because did the dual stream with Bob, and it's easier to do the interviews, but that was a little hiccup there. Thanks for being here, everybody. I'm super excited about tonight's guest, Lori Hellis. Like I said today in the stream, when we were watching the Chad Daybell's preliminary hearing, probable cause background on this case, as we have the trial coming up, big trial. It's going to be, I think, 8 weeks, maybe longer. And I want all of us to have a good background going into it, especially if you did not watch Lori Vallow's trial. So I have Lori Hellis, and I'm super excited to bring her on. But before I do, let me give you a little intro. Lori has been a family and criminal defense lawyer since 1992. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism from the University of Portland in Portland, Oregon, where she graduated magna cum laude. She holds a Doctor of Law degree from Lewis and Clark Northwestern School of Law in Portland, and a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from Oregon State University. Lori was also a fierce public defender who represented both adults and juveniles in criminal matters. She served 20 years in the Air National Guard and has been a passionate advocate for children, victims of domestic violence, and veterans. She is also a author who wrote the book, The No Nonsense Guide to Divorce, and coming out September 3rd this year, folks, Children of Darkness and Light, Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell, and the story of a murderous faith. So without further ado, Lori Hellis. Hey, Lori, how are you?
Hey, good. How are you?
I am great, and I really appreciate you coming on to talk about this case. Um, I kind of want to start with, how did you first learn about this case and start, researching and getting into it?
Well, I retired from practicing law. I was a small town criminal public defender. And I retired because I wanted to write, and I moved down to the suburban Phoenix area. And I thought I was going to hang out on my deck and write and avoid the snow, and because I had left Central Oregon. And I heard about this kind of strange case, and it started out when there was a local TV reporter who was reporting on this odd case of a it piqued my interest because it sounded like a family dispute. A brother shoots his sister's husband in self-defense, and that sounded kind of strange. And then in very short order, we heard that she had disappeared. Nobody knew where she was, and her children were missing. And that sort of piqued my interest. And then, of course, she was found in Hawaii and extradited. And that's when I got interested in the case.
Can you?
So when the kids' bodies were found, I thought, actually, what happened was I joined a couple of Facebook groups and that were covering following the case. And people were posting questions. And every time I answered a question, I had to explain who I was and why I knew what I was talking about. So I thought, well, I'll just start a little newsletter blog and talk about the legal questions in the case. And I was super excited when I had 200 subscribers, and now we're up around 6,000. So
Oh, awesome.
That's how it all started.
That is so cool. Can you believe 4 years now, what later, that you have a book that you were just saying you've done all this research on? Like,
Yeah.
that must be blowing your mind.
It is incredible that it's been 4 years and we're still not through the last trial.
It's wild. So, uh, let me ask you. So, let's talk about the book. What are you focusing on in this book about this case? Like, what's your focus on?
Well, I think people are most interested with the why. I think the reason we're interested in true crime is because people do things that are so aberrant, so strange to us that there's no way to wrap our brains around a mother who kills her own children. So we're trying to figure out why. So that really was where I started my focus, was what was it about her relationship with Chad Daybell, her religious beliefs, all of those sort of things that went into that stew that wound up with them committing these horrible crimes. So that's how I got started with it.
So let's kind of try to it's hard to wrap your we were talking about this before we got there's so much going on and it's hard to wrap your brain around it. But basically, so Chad is like he's the sexton at his church, right? He's the grave digger. He also does other stuff, but he's the grave digger. And then he starts writing these books, right, about the apocalypse,
Right.
and he's like this prophet, and there's 144,000 people, and he's gonna he knows who they are, and he's gonna save them. And then at some point, he's writing all these books, which are popular, right? They're pretty popular, and he's talking about them. And then at some point, he has a conference, and he meets Lori, right? And that's kind of where this all starts. Do I have that correct?
Right. Yeah.
So what? Go ahead.
Chad and Lori were both raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so a lot of their belief system sort of circles around the doctrine of the LDS Church. And so Chad had a journalism degree and worked in newspaper for a while, and then discovered he could make more money being a cemetery sexton and, essentially being in charge of the graveyard and digging graves. So he kind of went back and forth between those two things as he was trying to build his reputation as an author. I always say I read Chad Daybell's books. I took a bullet for the team, so you don't have to, because they're not good. They're pretty bad. So, he gained some popularity among LDS audiences, and his books were sold in LDS bookstores and Deseret Books. And so then he decided that he got a little sideways with Deseret Books, which has a very keeps a very firm hand on what they carry in the bookstores. And they didn't like some of the things that he had written in some of his books. And so they pulled his books off the shelf. And he decided to start his own publishing company. And that's how then we get into, he started publishing works by other people who'd had near-death experiences and were doomsdayers and were people who were forecasting the end of the world.
By the way, we are sharing. Make sure you're following Lori on Twitter. All the links are putting in there. Check out the book on Amazon. You can pre-order the book, as well as YouTube, folks. She has a YouTube channel, so make sure you check that. And she has a regular website that she was talking about where you blog what's going on. So all those links are
Yeah.
in there. Make sure you check them out.
Thanks.
Here's what I don't get, Lori. And I'm a little, I don't know this case as well as you do, obviously, but from what I've watched as I've researched and watched Chad Daybell, I see him talk sometimes. To me, he does not appear charismatic. Also, he's a dumb idiot. Like, he's not very smart. Like we were just watching the probable cause hearing, and the detectives, they're like, so you went to his house with a warrant, you look at him in the car, and he's just staring at the location where the bodies are. Like,
Oh,
he
yeah.
doesn't seem very bright. How did he get this following? Like, I asked in the chat today, like, are there any like videos of him preaching, or like, why are all these people following him, Lori? What was it about him that, like, he got this following?
Well, I think people originally liked his books. And so then he came out and announced that the stories that he had written in his book were really visions of what was going to come, that they weren't really fiction. And he really got on the bandwagon with a couple of other authors who he published, who were also talking about their near-death experiences and their doomsday prophecies for the tribulation. He's a very soft-spoken, self-deprecating kind of a guy. And I think that in any other forum, probably he wouldn't have come across as charismatic or interesting. But he very much fit the LDS mold. He had been on a church mission, graduated from BYU, had a married in the temple to Tammy Daybell, raised his children in the faith. And I think that his LDS bona fides were what really gave him credibility with people.
That makes and initially when he correct me if I'm wrong, but initially when he put those books out, he said they were fiction, but then
Right.
all of a sudden, like you said, he started seeing that the money came in when you said
Mhm.
it happened to you, and all of a
Right.
sudden he has these visions, right? And
Right.
the one interview I'm looking at, he's talking about this. I forget the guy's this. There's a ghost in his when he's working, and he finally tells him you got to
Yeah.
go to the light, and
Right.
so basically
Yeah.
he started it clicks in his head. I got to make this like this is I was involved with this, and that's when people
Mhm.
like, oh wait, this is the guy. So he actually had these visions.
Right.
Uh, so and correct me if I'm wrong, it evolved, right? Because obviously, I mean, obviously it evolved, but to do the deeds that they did, he had to like change, like, so
Mhm.
how it seems like to me from an outsider learning about this case, it happened very quickly. Was it or did it gradually develop, or was it like a quick thing that happened?
Well, I think each of them, Lori had been sort of studying near death and doomsday writings since about 2012 or 13. Chad the same, and he started writing these scenarios, these books, even earlier than that. And so, but I think what really happened quickly was he and Lori got together. So in October of 2018, Lori went from the Phoenix area where she lived to St. George, Utah for a Preparing a People conference. She went with five or six other women who were sort of like-minded. And one of them frequently attended these conferences and had met Chad before and knew that he was going to be there. And she described Lori as a super fan of Chad's. I mean, she was just obsessed. But she had no idea what she was setting in motion when she introduced Lori and Chad. So they met and fireworks, and they spent every waking hour together that weekend. And then he was going to the Phoenix area to speak at another Preparing People conference. And she invited him, as well as several other people, to come and stay at her house while the conference was going on. Her husband, Charles Vallow, was conveniently out of town on business that weekend. And that really was the point that they claim they went to the temple together and sealed themselves to one another because they had been married to one another in past lives. And they got burner phones so they could text and talk to one another all the time. And that really was when gasoline got poured on the fire.
And is that basically just Chad, like, this is a pickup line? Like this, I want to get this, I want to get this woman. I'm gonna tell her I know because I'm touched and I'm a god.
Right.
We knew, like, is that basically where he's like telling her all these stories to
I
like
think
get
so. I think so, because he's not the only one who has done that. There have been other LDS men who there is a faction within LDS that believe in reincarnation. They call it multiple mortal probations, and believe that Joseph Smith was had embraced that not very long before he died. And so they believed that he didn't really have time to tell everybody about it and to really write about it because he was murdered. So there is a group that believed that. And he's certainly not the only one to have told a woman, oh, we were married in a past life. The LDS church is very much a purity culture. And so it's a way of justifying an affair by saying, oh, well, we were already married. And, the church, after about 40 years of embracing polygamy, then stepped away from polygamy. And so the mainstream church doesn't believe in polygamy, but they believe that men are married to more than one woman in the celestial kingdom. So it still makes some sense when somebody says, "Oh, well, we've already been married."
Right.
Yeah.
So let me ask this. So the fireworks happen. He goes to her house. The fireworks happen. Then they got to start plotting all the stuff that goes down, right? Who do you think is it? Both of them that are like doing this together? Is it Lori? Is it like who is like the one who's like thinking of all these? And we're talking about now. We got to start talking about people being light and dark and numerical values. Is that all Chad? Is Lori part of that? What do you think?
That was all Chad. So his belief that he could see who you'd been in a past life, his belief that he could see dark and light spirits, that really comes from Chad. Um, but I think anyone will tell you that Chad was a dreamer, Lori was the doer. And so it really, anybody who knew them together would say Chad would come up with all these things, but it was Lori who said we need to take some action. She was the actor. And so it is, I think it's very difficult to say whose idea it became. I think that it started with Charles Vallow because Chad told Lori that Charles had had been inhabited by an evil spirit. And then as they went along, Chad said, well, the only way to get a person, an evil spirit out of a body is to kill the body. And then you free the person's spirit that's been in limbo because the evil spirit has pushed them out. And so I think that's kind of the way it started. But I think it would be difficult to say who was the impetus to say, well, let's just kill him. Lori, there is history. Lori's brother Alex, who was the person who pulled the trigger for Charles Vallow, he had attempted an assault, which everyone thinks was an attempted murder, on Lori's third husband, Joe Ryan. And
The taser, right?
with the taser, yeah. And he believed because Joe Ryan had a heart condition that if he tased him in the chest, it would stop his heart. So, I mean, he wasn't the brightest bulb on the string either. But I think I think that if you look back at it, the idea to kill someone to remove them as a problem, I think that started that far back.
Well,
And
speaking of
I'm not sure that they would have gotten there had that not already been sort of in the back of their minds, Lori and Alex's.
and speaking of that his death that was natural causes. But didn't they go after all this happened? Didn't they go again and do another? And they still said natural causes.
For Joe Ryan?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the problem with that was he died alone in his apartment. He had he had some health problems, including a heart condition. There was a lot of medication in his apartment that, drew people to think, well, maybe he was more seriously ill than he let on. And unfortunately, they were in the Phoenix area, and his body wasn't discovered for well over a week, close to 2 weeks. The condition of his body made it very difficult for them to do a lot of autopsy testing. The after that, after this all happened, and a recording surfaced of Lori talking about if she didn't turn her life to the temple, she was going to kill him. His sister, Annie Cushing, demanded that they reopen his case. So they did reopen his case. Lori had him cremated as quickly as she possibly could.
Oh, okay.
She was still listed as his next of kin, even though they had been divorced for years. and she had him cremated right away. But the state did have tissue samples that they had kept, and they were able to retest those samples. Testing for poisons or tox tests are very complicated. I mean, somehow we think, oh, you just put it in a machine and it spits out what the substance is. And that's not it at all. They have to actually do an individual test for each and every substance. And so the screenings that they were able to do with the material they had didn't turn up any toxicities. But we also know that that Alex Cox drove down a week before his death, drove down to Mexico and bought drugs and came back. And a week later, he died. And I think we are going to see some more information come up about that in Chad's trial than we saw in Lori's.
About Alex's death?
About Alex's death, yeah.
So he
And
went. Go ahead.
the week before he died, now Tammy Daybell died the 19th of October, and Chad Daybell, I think within 48 hours, he had her in the ground. She had been embalmed and transported to Springville, Utah, and buried. But as this case started to develop and people realized there were missing children and nobody had seen them, and the state of Idaho went back and got a court order to exhume Tammy Daybell. So on December 11th, Alex Cox got a telephone call from Chad and Lori telling them that Tammy was going to her body had been exhumed. And the following day, Alex died of a bilateral pulmonary embolism on the bathroom of his new wife's house, on the bathroom floor. And it was really very too much of a coincidence for it to really be a coincidence. He also was ruled, his death was also ruled natural causes, but I think there are an awful lot of people who think that he took his own life.
By taking those drugs?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that he took something that he brought back from Mexico.
And this is right after he finds out that Tammy's going to be, they're going to be
Right.
investigating
The day
that.
after.
Now,
Yeah.
regarding Tammy, I know that is it the day that she dies? Or I know that they're casting right before, and then all of a
Right.
sudden a guy comes up to her and she's at her car and hears two like pops and then goes away, which was probably him because his phone pings there, right? But what about the actual? Is the accusation that he is the one that, because she was found to be suffocated, right?
Right.
That was the finding.
Well, there are a couple of there are many unknowns about this case. It's a very circumstantial case, so there's many unknowns about it. On the 9th of October, Tammy Daybell was coming home from church, from some sort of a church function, and getting some things out of her car, when she looked up and saw a man all dressed in black with a ski mask on and what she believed to be a paintball gun, because she had never seen the only guns that looked like an AR that she had ever seen were paintball guns. And it had a suppressor on it, so it sounded like a paintball gun. It made a kind of a whooshing sound. So he fired, no one's quite sure how many rounds, but they did recover rounds out of a tree behind Chad's house that were right in line with where he would have fired. Alex Cox appears to have been a singularly bad shot because he made 2 attempts and missed both of them. So because he also attempted to kill Melanie Boudreau Pulowski's ex-husband, Brandon, a few days before. So he shoots at Tammy Daybell. She calls for Chad to come out. He runs off around the house and disappears. 10 days later, Chad calls 911 early in the morning and says he woke up and his wife was dead. She had died in her sleep. So what we don't know is Alex Cox's telephone was located in the church parking lot that night, about a mile and a half away from Chad's house. So either he left his phone in the car and walked down to do the deed, or he was there as backup in case Chad couldn't go through with it. So, but either way, one of the two of them suffocated her.
And didn't Lori at some point text or say something like, "You can't even do that, right?" Or you something to that effect that
So that was the night of the gunshots. So Lori always made sure that she was out of town to give herself an alibi. So she was in Arizona with all of her girlfriends, and they were doing a casting, and she had asked them to cast the evil spirit out of Tammy, and because Tammy had recently become evil. And so she was there leading this casting. They were going to cast out the evil spirit out of Tammy. And then, as Lori always did, she called Chad to ask, well, did what we did work? And that was when she found out that Alex had missed. And that was when she said, that moron, he can't do anything without somebody standing right beside him. And she was very, very angry that he hadn't been able to pull off what they had planned.
and basically, two murders. He couldn't pull off two. He tried to do two,
Right?
and was a bad shot on both of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, this casting is just so the casting is basically Chad says he determines who is now a dark soul or dark, and he has a scale which is very like 3.6. It's
Right.
like
It's all
decimal.
scientific.
It's
Yeah.
all very scientific because he's a
Yeah.
doctor and a genius, as we know. So he
Right.
has this scale. He tells folks, listen, this person is dark now, and basically what they think, and is this how they kind of justify themselves, the deeds they do, because do they really believe at that point that there is someone else who is in there, there's like a spirit who's in them, and that
Yep.
person is gone, and the only way to save that person is to get rid of that body, right, and to
Right.
kill the person essentially, and then they go to heaven. And then now let me ask you this, so when
Right.
they go, are they part of the 144th, that like when that happens, they believe that now they're saved and they're
Well, they go to the celestial kingdom because they're faithful LDS members. And so, yes, they believe that and they also believe families stay together for eternity. So they believe that they're all going to be reunited in heaven. And so that's why Lori Vallow said at her sentencing allocution, my children are in heaven and they're happy and I'll see them again. And because families stay together in heaven. So, yeah, that's what they believed. They also believed that the end of the world was going to begin in July of 2020. And there was a whole like calculation. I mean, you have to sort of start out with some assumptions that get you to their calculation, but they believe that that was going to happen in July of 2020. So really, they just felt like they were waiting it out because they felt like, first of all, they felt that God was going to deliver them from prison, and that like the Apostle Paul in the Bible, the earthquake was going to happen and the prison walls were going to fall down and they were going to walk out. And then they also believed that once the tribulation happened and the earthquakes and the wars and everything started to happen, people weren't going to pay one bit of attention to where Lori Vallow's children were, or how Tammy Vallow died, or Tammy Daybell died. And so, I mean, she told Melanie Gibb, when Melanie Gibb asked her, uh, why didn't you just get divorced? Why? Well, we couldn't do that because Chad's a prophet, and his standing with the Lord would have been brought down if he got divorced. And so, but we just knew that once all of this started, nobody was going to care, and everybody was going to be so worried about themselves, no one was going to care. So, when the tribulation didn't start in July of 2020, they were kind of up a creek.
yeah, do we have any indication if after that doesn't happen they start being like, oh shit, we really fucked this? I mean, we Like, what at
You
that
know,
point, what are they
I
thinking?
think every indication is that it was sobering for Chad, but for Lori, she is deeply delusional. And for her, she just said, "Well, Satan won and delayed the tribulation. Satan won this round and delayed Jesus coming back." And so and in sort of typical cult fashion, blamed the followers and said, if you'd been more faithful, God would have come back. So
Right.
pretty interesting.
It is. It's super interesting to me, and like I feel like right now, Lori. I mean, I think Chad, like you said, is different, but like for Lori, does she even give a shit about these? She doesn't care about any of this stuff, right? Because she's just like, none of this matters. I am
Nope.
a prophet. Did you like? I'm
I'm a
almost.
goddess.
She's a goddess. I'm almost
Right.
surprised she didn't want the death penalty, so she could be like, just be done with this mortal life. Like, why does she want to be in jail anymore? Like, I almost feel like she, I don't know. But you're saying Chad is not so much that like, or
I think that Chad has a little bit closer connection to reality than Lori does. Because Lori, it's interesting that delusional disorders, and I'm not a psychologist, but delusional disorders, people can still be pretty functional in their daily lives. They can still put gas in the car and get their kids to school, and yet be utterly delusional when it comes to their religious beliefs. And I think that's where she is. She absolutely believes that she is an exalted uh, goddess and that she is there to perform her mission. I think the reason why she doesn't want the death penalty is because she feels she has a mission to complete, and that she would be letting God down if she didn't complete her mission. So yeah, it is a very strange psychological disorder because someone can be so firmly rooted in their delusion that you can't shake them. You cannot shake them out of it.
which was pretty evident during her speech at her
Yeah.
sentencing. I mean, it was
And everything that I understand going forward is that she absolutely will not be shaken out of it. Her time in the women's prison in Pocatello, her she's been transferred to Arizona and is in the Phoenix Maricopa County Jail awaiting trial, and she's absolutely unshakable. She's yeah,
whenever you see her, she's all smiles. She's just having a good time, man. It's wild.
yeah.
So speaking of, so she's like in that, and but like you said, Chad is a little bit more grounded, and maybe. So let me ask you this: based on that, is Chad's trial going to be a little different? Because I feel like Lori probably was not a great client to have. She doesn't care. She's probably like, do whatever you want. But like, is Chad going to be throwing people under the bus here, trying to?
Way different, absolutely. First of all, his attorney is very different. His attorney is definitely a more aggressive, more assertive kind of attorney than Lori's attorneys were. Um, and so I think you're going to see more fireworks just because of that. But I also think he's already said he's got 7 witnesses, expert witnesses that he's calling. So I think you're going to see a very different kind of a trial. He's certainly going to mount a vigorous defense on behalf of Chad.
Yeah,
And Chad is utterly convinced that he is innocent. And I think that is because Chad is, we've said, not the brightest guy in the world. And I think he really does not understand the legal concept of aiding and abetting or conspiracy. He thinks that as long as he didn't get his hands dirty, he didn't put his hands on anyone who died, that he's innocent and that he will be found not guilty.
kind of sounds like a little person we know, Donna Adelson. Well, they weren't involved,
Yeah,
It
yeah,
wasn't them. They can't be
very
guilty.
similar. Mhm.
So like, do you think he'll give the okay to say, hey, this was Lori's deal? I don't know what the hell, like, or this was Alex. I mean, Alex is dead now, so like, why not just say it was all
right.
his idea. Like I just made these. I just wrote these books. I didn't know what these people were going to do. Like.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I mean obviously we don't know, but I mean it's going to be very
Yes,
curious to see.
I think he is going to throw both Lori and Alex under the bus big time. And I don't think that he has the same sense of allegiance to Lori that she has to him.
Right. Well, speaking of her lawyer, I was saying today, like research and keep up. I listened to the opening statements, and man, it was his name Archibald. His opening statement, I almost fell asleep. Like it was like, and I know when we were talking about Bob Mata, I know he was covering it at the time, and he was like,
Yeah,
I didn't have enough time to like get stuff out because like he didn't do anything as a defense. Look, it just went
no,
so fast because he
mm,
really wasn't objecting to anything. So,
no,
like you said, that we got this is going to be a completely different deal. This is going to be a vigorous defense.
yeah.
So we're going to see a much different trial. So when speaking of, go ahead, go ahead.
I think we're gonna see the same outcome, and I think we're going to see we're gonna see 8 weeks of trial and a couple of weeks of penalty phase because I think he's going to be found guilty, and then we're going to have to deal with whether or not the death penalty gets imposed. But I think for people who thought Lori Vallow's trial was a bit of a yawner, and part of it was that we'd seen an awful lot of that evidence thanks to big data dumps from Arizona. So there wasn't a lot of new information. And for people who think her trial was a bit of a yawner, I think they ought to hold on because I think Chaz is going to be juicy.
Well, it also didn't help that it was audio only and it was released
No,
later. So, like, guys, if you don't know, this one's live stream. This one's not audio only. It's not released later.
right.
This is going to be, like a regular trial that we normally watch together. So, get ready for that. Um, and what do you think about when we talked about this a little bit before? But I guess if you could explain to the folks who don't know, Rachel Smith, the prosecutor, first of all, she's like, "I'm out." She's out right before, and then also the defense attorney is like, "I'm out." He wanted to go out, but he was denied. If you could just to give a quick recap for the folks who don't know
Sure.
what happened there.
So Rachel Smith was brought in as a consultant because she had done murder trials and death penalty cases before. And she actually is from Missouri, and she was a consulting attorney that was brought in. She was admitted to practice in Idaho just for the purpose of Lori Vallow's case. And she was brought in to advise the prosecutors because neither one of them, both of them were fairly newly elected, and neither one of them had ever tried a murder, let alone a death penalty. So they brought Rachel Smith in to help with that. She was paid actually by Madison County. There are two counties side by side, and Chad Daybell's property was about 100 yards into Fremont County. Madison County is where the city of Rexburg is. Madison County paid for Rachel Smith to act as a consultant, and it was not an inexpensive proposition. And they paid for all her travel and her living expenses when she was in town, and so it was a financial burden prior to, and this is not all to Rachel Smith, but even before Lori Vallow's trial started, the little 11,000 population 11,000 county of Fremont County had already spent $3.4 million on the Vallow Daybell case. It cost them another million and a half to have the trial over here in Ada County. So they had already spent an awful lot of money, and I think they just felt like they'd run out of money. So Rachel Smith left the case. They brought in an assistant attorney general, which is paid for by the state, to kind of fill her spot. So there will be an additional attorney that'll be somebody who's assistant AG. But Rachel Smith, funnily enough, there is another case here. The guy's name is Jeremy Best, and Jim Archibald, Lori's attorney, was appointed to represent him. And they just hired Rachel Smith to come in and help the prosecution on
Oh
that
wow.
case. It's a death penalty case, another very small Idaho county. So, and then John Pryor, Chad's attorney filed a motion to be removed from the case because Chad was indigent and couldn't pay him anymore. Now we haven't known for a long time how Chad was paying John Pryor. When Lori and Chad came back from Hawaii 4 years ago, he had $130,000 left of the $430 he had gotten from Tammy's life insurance. I'm certain that that money was eaten up pretty quickly between her lawyer and his lawyer. He then signed over the equity in his property to John Pryor, which was about another $80,000-ish. But John Pryor actually in a sealed hearing told the judge in January of 2023 that Chad was indigent and out of money. Pryor wanted to stay on the case, but he wanted the court to approve additional money for him to hire a death penalty qualified public defender as to come along and do the case with him. There is a nationwide problem with public defenders. They don't get paid enough, and people are not going into public defense. So there is a nationwide shortage of public defenders. And John Pryor was not able to find someone who was willing to take what the state would pay, which is about $40 an hour. And he wasn't, thank you, Susan. He wasn't willing to, they couldn't find anybody that was willing to come in and join the case. So they ended up not being able to bring anybody else on. And John Pryor went out and tried to get someone he knew to get state qualified so that he could join the case. And that never really happened. And it's just been very, very difficult for him to get any help. So he went back to the court and said, I want to withdraw from the case because Chad can't pay me anymore and I can't get any help. And so what really came out was he was hoping that if he withdrew from the case, the judge would then be forced to make the state provide defense attorneys. And I think that was his strategy going into it. But John Pryor is not one to admit that he can't do something. So by the end of that hearing, he had said, Judge, I don't really care about the money. I just need extra help. And when he said to the judge, I don't care about the money, the judge said, well, in that case, your motion's denied and you can't get off the case. So it was sort of crazy all the way around. It certainly didn't accomplish what John Pryor wanted, was to get some help. And he ended up staying on the case for no money. So
this has been so awesome, and you've been so insightful. Guys, make sure you're following. We're sharing. Make sure you're following Lori on Twitter. She's very close to 7,000. Please, YouTube, check out the book, pre-order the book. So I'm curious. You're talking about the death penalty. You know, that's obviously a big part of this.
right.
Do you think I just can't imagine any jury that finds this man guilty does not give him the death penalty based on, just on how the kids were found. Just an absolute, what horrific. I can't imagine. Like, I think you said it might take a little while for them to, because I saw something like they have to determine, there's a couple of factors they have to mitigate. I forget exactly what the law is, but I can't imagine any jury that finds him guilty not thinking he deserves a death penalty after the horrific crime.
I can't either. I feel like, and understanding Idaho being a different sort of jurisdiction from a lot of other jurisdictions. Idaho is a very conservative state, and one of the issues that has come up over and over again with lethal injection is that the companies who make the drugs, the states call them chemicals, they don't call them drugs, but the companies that make the drugs that they use for lethal injection have boycotted any selling to any state that uses it for lethal injection. So it's next to impossible to get the drugs that they need to perform a lethal injection. So they're having to go to compounding pharmacies, which are pharmacies that make drugs out of the raw materials. And even that hasn't been very effective. So the state of Idaho decided that they were going to reinstate the firing squad as a method of execution, and did that shortly after Chad and Lori were indicted. So it wouldn't apply to either one of them because it can't be applied retroactively. But they have brought back the firing squad, and in fact, the case that Rachel Smith went to in Canyon County, that fellow's name is Jeremy Best, and they're seeking the death penalty against him. And the firing squad is an option for him.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah. So it's the death penalty has a checkered past, and some states are more amenable to imposing it than others.
And even if they do, I mean, it'll be years and years and years, right? With all the appeals, which also, by the way, how much money will that cost? I mean, like
Millions.
millions and millions of dollars, right? And like,
Yeah.
so that's interesting. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. So, from what I understand, this week the jury's coming in, but not to like, it's just like they have like a 23-page like questionnaire they have to fill, and that's just this week. So, and then after this week, I think next week is when they start, and that could be another week to 2 weeks, right? So this is we might not be talking about a trial for like 3 weeks from now, right? Is that correct?
Yeah. Initially, Judge Boyce was talking about trying to start jury selection this next week. It apparently didn't happen with Ada County. They weren't able to figure that part out with Ada County. And so they send out the jury subpoenas, and along with the jury subpoenas, they send out to everyone a very lengthy questionnaire. The jurors are going to be dropping those questionnaires back off in person this next week. And they'll be doing some initial screenings for whether or not people have hardships or are for other reasons not appropriate jurors. You're not always able to tell the age of someone when jury summons go out. And they do have it at cutoff age, so they don't ask people over 70 to come in and sit on jury duty. So they'll kind of weed those people out, and people will have the opportunity to express if they have hardships, because of work or because of family caregiving. And then they'll kind of sort those out as they go through them.
I mean, honestly, I don't know how people couldn't have a hardship. It's such a long trial. Like, it's got to be hard to find people that would not be to be away for so long from your job. Like, it's
Yeah,
got to be hard to find.
it is hard. It is hard. And there were several people on Lori's jury who were fortunate enough to work for companies that actually gave the people jury leave. So they were able to continue to get their salary while they were on jury leave. But that's not common. It is common in larger companies, big companies, but in some of the smaller companies, that's just not common. I mean, employers just can't afford to keep paying somebody who's not working.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, it's already been 50 minutes. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Were you gonna say something?
So it'll be interesting to see, but they called in about 1,200 people for Lori's trial, and I suspect they'll call in at least that number for Chad.
So I can't believe it's almost been an hour. This has been amazing. I'm curious, is there anything I know you said like look for, with the defense and is there anything in this trial maybe that you think is going to be to look out for that was different from Lori's other than what we already went over? Anything well, I know you already said the experts.
I think John Pryor is going to call some experts within the public or within the defense community. There are topics that come up that are sort of raised, they become things that defense attorneys talk about. And one of the things that defense attorneys really feel is an area that needs exploration is the information that is turned out by the FBI's CAST program. So this is GPS and cell phone data. So we've always been able to figure out where somebody was by their cell phone data, by looking at the towers and triangulating the towers. But this CAST essentially came up with a new algorithm that they apply to that data and has been able to pinpoint people within 3 to 5 feet, which was never possible until this point. One of the pieces of information is that Alex Cox was in Chad Daybell's backyard within 3 feet of J.J. Vallow's grave on the morning after the last time he was seen. And so I think that John Pryor will likely test and challenge the scientific reliability, the Daubert standard of that information. That's one area that I was surprised that Lori's attorneys didn't go into, but I think that John Pryor probably will.
Here's a question I have. I can't let you go without asking this question. Do you think the prophet, the man himself, Chad, the human potato, is he going to testify? Is this man, I mean, he's a god. He could convince people to do anything. Is he going to testify no,
First of all, he's a coward. So he's not going to go there. And he's a very, like a lot of people within that. I always have to preface this by saying, I am not anti-LDS. People who belong to the LDS church make some of the best neighbors you will ever have. And some of my own family are members of the LDS church. So, but being a Mormon is as much cultural as it is religious, because they're very insulated against people who are not members of the church. And so Chad is very like stereotypical LDS man. He is not a bold thinker. He is not a bold person. I don't think that we would have ever gotten him to proclaiming that he saw visions and could pierce the veil had he not had a financial motivation for it. And I don't think we would have ever gotten, he would have never been involved in something as heinous as murder had he not been encouraged by Lori. And she was the actor, he was the thinker. So, and I think that he has gotten, and it's a very patriarchal culture. And people are very much taught to follow their leaders. And I think that he will see John Pryor as a leader. And I think that he will follow John Pryor's advice and he will not testify.
That's so interesting. Yeah. It's just so interesting to me that like, you know, he had these delusions, but he doesn't have the delusions of grandeur to the point where he thinks, whereas Lori, I'm almost picturing Lori in there in her head, looking at people in the courtroom, like, you know, dark 6.6. Like
she was doing that. She was rating people in the courtroom.
Was she writing it down, or
the court staff later said, "Oh yeah, she was taking notes and rating people in the courtroom, whether they were dark or light."
Was anyone light?
Rating the jury.
Oh, she was rating the jury.
Oh yeah.
I assume they were all dark, or did she give any? Does anyone know what their score?
Many of them, most of them were. Yeah.
That's so wild. So she's doing that, but him, he's not like. So really, I mean, it sounds like she is like you said, he's thinking he has these ideas, but she's like, this is how we're gonna get this done.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so interesting.
No question.
And she's still got a trial coming up in Arizona, right?
In Arizona, I think it's early September. I want to say September 3rd-ish, whatever that first week in September is. And that is right at the end of her speedy trial window there, and she won't waive her speedy trial.
And
She didn't in this case. So
is there an option for a death penalty there?
no, there isn't, because it's only conspiracy to commit murder. And so it's life in prison with 25 years before you're eligible for parole, which is essentially no parole.
And how does that work as far as her sentences? Like, so if she's found guilty there, does she go back and like, how
She'll
does
go
that?
back to Idaho to serve her sentence, and the Arizona sentence will be kind of the backstop.
Wow.
But there were a lot of people who said, "Why are we even bothering? She's already got 3 life sentences. Why are we even bothering?" And I think the answer is Charles Vallow deserves justice, and his family deserves the closure of justice for him. He has 2 adult sons that I think, and of course, Kay Woodcock, his sister, and I think he deserves justice, and they deserve that closure too. So
And man, watching it's so heartbreaking to watch that footage where he's just they took his stuff. He's going to his house. He's trying to explain to these cops, but how
yeah,
can you really explain that to anyone? Like, listen, she's a demon. She thinks
yeah,
she's. I mean, he tells his divorce attorney she's gonna be the one if I
yeah,
die, and like you can't really can you. There's no one's gonna like set anything up so like that to keep her away from you. Like you can't explain it. No one can
yeah,
like wrap their head around it that like really
yeah.
what he's saying. They're probably like, she's just she's loony or whatever. Like,
Well, I mean, I think they all believed that she had some really serious mental health issues, but I don't think that anyone could wrap their brain around, if something happens to me, she did it. I mean, I did criminal and family law for almost 30 years, and I can tell you that I had more than one client who said to me, "Oh, if I turn up dead, it's going to be because of him." And there were times I believed it, and other times that I thought, well, okay, and I think it's human nature not to be able to wrap your brain around something so awful.
and she's just got like she had a brother who was like the enforcer. Like he
Yeah,
was like the hitman and the mob. Like just tell him to do something and he's gonna. I mean, he clearly
yeah,
screwed it up as we talked about a few times, but ultimately he did these things and he's thinking the same thing, right? Like these people are dark. I gotta save them. And he's got
yeah.
Chad and the 2 of them. It's just so sad, but I can't believe
When
it's
when he talked to Zulema, he had just married her about 2 weeks before he died. She was one of Lori's followers, and when he talked to her, she said, "Are you?" She's sort of asking him, "How are you? Are you okay after shooting Charles?" And he said, "Zulema, he was a he was a zombie. I don't feel bad about shooting him. He was." That was their term for someone who had been taken over by an evil spirit. He was a zombie. I didn't feel bad. So
it's just wild case, and we've gone through so much of it, and I can't thank you enough for coming on
I'm
and
happy to. I'm happy to come back and during the trial if you'd like to visit
oh,
again. I'd
that would
love
be
to.
amazing. Are you kidding me?
Sure,
Absolutely. Is there
sure.
anything like I said, I've been sharing your anything else you want us to plug here? You have your YouTube, Twitter, your website, the book coming out was September 3rd. Is that correct? September 3rd.
The book hits the shelf on September 3rd. It's available for pre-order right now. I have a group of folks, and I've still got room for a few more, who I'm going to send an early digital copy out for so they can review the book before it comes out. So anybody's interested in that. And I am going to CrimeCon. Are you going to CrimeCon?
I didn't make the I didn't make the cut. I applied but did not make the cut, so probably not.
Well, I mean, I applied and didn't make the cut either, but I am going to have a booth there to promote the book. So
Oh, nice. Awesome.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
May, right? May in Nashville?
May 30th through June 1st. Yeah,
All right. So
yeah.
guys, she's gonna be
And
in Nashville. If you're
listen, you got to come down anyway because it is a blast. You
that's
know,
I keep hearing that. It's
it's a
just
lot of fun. Yeah.
all right, I'll have to look into that. Me and Sean will have to look into that.
It's really fun to meet the creators that you've gotten to know over online, meet them in person. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I definitely I mean, I definitely wanna do that, so I'll have to look into that, but, man, Lori, thank you so much. Please, guys,
Sure.
if you're on the Rewatch crew, follow on Twitter, follow on YouTube, check out the book, all the things, please do it. Laura, any final words? Anything else? Any final words?
No, just thanks for having me on. It was a blast. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, and I hope you guys got some more of a background, and we'll keep doing this before the trial. It might be a few weeks, but
Right. If
uh,
if other questions come up, give me a call.
oh, absolutely. If you want to come back during the trial, that would be amazing. This has been amazing. Thank you all so much, and we'll catch you on the next one. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.